I'm just hanging out here. No one's on yet, so I'm gonna just stay here until anyone shows up. Hey, Julie. You're my one loyal soldier today. Oh, I think you're on mute. You're on. There you go.
Am I the only one coming?
I don't know. So far I was like, this is going to be a fun discussion all by myself. I mean, I can just talk on the subjects, but it's obviously a lot more engaging if there's someone else to kind of share their questions with. So thanks for making time to be on the call.
Sure.
Those are cute glasses. We're both rocking the glasses today.
I know.
So if you don't mind, I'll jump in with you just so we can kind of get started. And then any questions you have, I'm happy to, address those as well. But this was the last week. And did you have a chance to see the email or kind of do any of the homework from this week on the Love It foods, or excuse me, on the Learning It foods?
I haven't practiced it yet because I was going to make the meal tonight, but around like playing with food and stuff like that.
I know you said, I think it was last week you were mentioning like you guys had some wins with that, or at least made some progress.
Yeah.
Someone else doing it. But, right.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to do that.
And so last week what we touched on and then what I shared links for in this week's homework was the sharing the steps to eating. So helping people see, how you can get a child from, and you and I have talked about this individually, but also on the group calls each week about when a child won't even tolerate having something on their plate, it would be a big jump to get them to, hi, Emily. Hi. Can you hear us, Emily? Hello. I'm guessing it's sunny where you are. You might not be able to see us, but it doesn't say that you're muted, but I can't hear you. Oh, now you're muted. Let's see. Let me see if there we go. I unmuted you. There we go.
Sorry, my camera was working, so I had to try it on my phone now.
Hey, no problem. We're glad to have you. At first, it was just me on the call, so I'm glad to see both of you, but I'm also glad to not be on here alone. So great to have you. So we were just kind of jumping into the email from this week and talking through how last week I screen shared, the steps to eating diagram and kind of talking through the logistics of that. But I really just want to, as specific as we can. I was hoping a lot of people would be on this week because the questions I get all the time are, how do I get my kid to eat blank? And so, I'd love to talk through any specific examples. I know that no matter what we share here, hopefully it'll be kind of relevant or at least helpful to those who get to listen to the recording, just because we all struggle with, learning how to help our kids learn to like a lot of these new foods. And so, I share a lot about this in the featured article on the homework from this weekend, but I also just wanted to take some time to talk through that today, and then also to address some of the questions, one of which, Emily, I think it was you who asked about the vitamins, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then there was also a question from Ruth last week that I thought we could kind of chat through too, regarding like kind of how to get spouses on board. So maybe we just go ahead and start with the questions in the Facebook group, and then we'll open up the discussion towards talking more about like the learning to like it foods, because I feel like that we could just talk the entire remaining amount of time on. So So to pull up the questions, I'll go ahead and start with yours, Emily. So you asked, for my 3-year-old who is likely lacking in some nutrients based on his limited Levitt foods, do you recommend vitamin supplements? The thing is, he doesn't eat gummies, so I'm not sure what form he would take it in. So again, just because I think, while it's unique to you and personal to you, I think others might benefit from this as well. So do you mind sharing with me, like specifically, I know in the advanced template, we break it down kind of by food group. Which food groups does he tend to eat well from? I mean, I normally can guess just because majority of kids fall in the same categories, but just if you don't mind, entertaining this, which food groups is he lacking in, and which ones is he probably getting enough of?
Yeah, he's definitely, like you've kind of mentioned, like the beige foods. Like he does really well with like the grains. We're fine there. Most grains he's fine with. Like fruits and vegetables, he really, like even fruits, he's not a big fruit. He's really weird about the textures and he's only taken recently to eating bananas. And
okay.
I think in the last call too, I do smoothies and he'll drink them, but we don't do them every day, and I'm sure I'm still lacking in some things. So he's really, not getting the nutrients via fruits and vegetables. And he'll do some of the proteins, like he'll do hummus, he'll do chicken, trying to think of what else. And then dairy, like he'll do milk and like cottage cheese.
Okay.
Like really the fruits and vegetables that we're lacking.
Sure. And so just for everyone's kind of background on this would be, the main reason I ask which food groups is because obviously each food group tends to contribute a certain type of nutritional profile. I mean, every food is unique, but we obviously see deficits more if, for example, if a kid can't have dairy, or I think it's Sandy's child who has, several allergies and things. Sometimes like if a child either chooses to avoid or has to because of allergens, avoid a certain food group, we are looking at what nutritional deficits that child might have. So that's what a lot of times when I do a one-on-one consultation, we're kind of addressing, okay, over the scope of, because, we're not too concerned of if they miss that food group one day, or even if they kind of go through food jags where they're just not really into that food group for even a week. But if we look over the course of like a week, a month, into a year, if that child really is not eating a lot of dairy or eating a lot of meat, or eating a lot of fruits or vegetables and things like that, that's where you see those deficits actually matter. So if a kid just doesn't eat fruits or vegetables for a day, I'm not that concerned. But if a child doesn't eat fruits and vegetables for like a whole year, there are probably some nutrients lacking. So just kind of that background information for everyone when they kind of think through like, okay, this is a food group that my child completely isn't. And obviously if anyone wants like customized advice, I'm happy to give that even once the group session is over. You guys can reach out to me and we can chat through it. But in short, when we look at kind of the blanket recommendation to have a multivitamin, a lot of parents and even health practitioners would recommend like it is a good safety net because your child will store fat soluble vitamins, but they're going to pee out the extra ones. But the caveat with that, I always remind parents, is like we don't want our child to have the most expensive pee. So don't just put vitamins into them that they're going to pee out and pay money for the vitamins that they're just peeing out. If they don't need them, like it isn't necessarily an essential part of it. And another thing to kind of like interject here would be fruits can offer a lot of the same nutrients as vitamins. And I know in your case, Emily, it's not like he's eating copious amount of fruits, but for many people, fruits are easier to get in than vegetables. And so we, of course, want our children to learn to like vegetables, but while they're learning to like them and maybe not eating a lot of vegetables, they can still get a lot of the same vitamins and minerals from fruit. So typically I would say like if your kid is getting the recommended amount of fruits, which is on like one of those templates from the download, or even more than that, I wouldn't probably worry too much about like the vitamins and minerals between fruits and vegetables. That said, where it gets a little bit more complicated would be the minerals like calcium and iron. And so calcium, obviously, and vitamin D, we know would be in dairy sources. So oftentimes, just like kids like beige, kids often like dairy. So unless dairy has to be avoided, dairy is a food group that we want to make sure that kids are getting their nutrition from, because it is pretty challenging for kids who don't consume any dairy to get enough calcium and vitamin D. And the American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend like blanket vitamin D supplementation for children, just because the needs are continuing to be seen as higher and higher and higher. So I don't think vitamin D is bad to supplement in any kid, but I would recommend like a single vitamin D supplement rather than necessarily having to do a multi. And part of that, like for your child, you even if, it sounds like he's drinking milk and having cottage cheese, vitamin D's come in like drops usually. And so it's very easy for any kid. I mean, I give it to my infant up through my 5-year-old, just because the upper limit on how much they can have of vitamin D is rather high. So supplementing vitamin D on top of what's in their diet will not hurt them. Things like calcium may or may not be in a multivitamin. So where we might see, oftentimes you do see vitamin D added to a multivitamin normally will not have calcium or will have small amounts. So it kind of depends on which the multivitamin is, but that's because it's kind of like a bulkier mineral. So some multivitamins will have it, but you have to take several of them because they can only get so much calcium per gummy or tablet or whatever it might be. So I address that because a lot of times parents think, okay, if I give my kid a multivitamin, that's like the full coverage life insurance of all they need. But what they don't realize is normally these vitamins and minerals that are actually the ones lacking in the diet, being the calcium, the vitamin D, the iron, aren't actually in the multivitamin. So the reason I bring this up is if you do choose to get a multivitamin, make sure you kind of think through or talk with me through what is lacking in my child's diet and is it in this multi, rather than just kind of assuming a multi is going to have everything. So the last, I know I'm kind of spitting out a lot of information, so I'll take questions in a minute, but the last one, which is probably the most important one, is the iron. A lot of kids, we know from like infancy on, kids need iron, and yet kids a lot of times, if they're averse to meat, and not many kids eat like beans or are going to eat enough spinach or kale to like be able to absorb the amount of iron that they need. Iron is something that a lot of kids don't get enough of. And the challenge with that we see is that iron is not very commonly added to a multivitamin. And so again, just make sure if you're realizing like, okay, what my kid really needs is iron and you get a multivitamin, you need to either make sure to pick one with iron or you need to figure out ways to add iron into, their diet or using a different supplement or something. So that's all kind of like the background on, I would say, considerations to think through when you're looking at like, does my child need a multi? And if so, which one? So then along the lines of yours, gummies can be challenging for younger children. And so you can pick ones that are chewables, not necessarily a gummy, but like a crunchy, almost like the texture of like a Flintstone vitamin. Or there are some that are powders or drops that you could like mix into water or milk, or the drop, you can just basically have them open their mouth and you can put it in. So there are some options there. I was going to say trying to think what the best way to share this would be. I'm not sure. I know the reason I'm saying this is so I have access to a formulary that has like different vitamins and minerals and supplements. And I mean, everything from, hi Cecilia, everything from prenatals to basically any vitamin or mineral supplement anyone in the lifespan would need. And so I can share recommendations there for you guys to order and you guys can get my wholesale pricing. And so what I might do, what might be easiest, I was going to say, I know Emily, you specifically were asking, but if you wanted to look into some, there are a few there that aren't gummies, but would be a chewable or a drop or a powder option. So that might be something to consider, and you can look through those there and order through this. And normally I get around like 20-ish, it kind of depends on the product, but like 20-ish% off on those items from like what you would get on Amazon or Whole Foods or something like that. So I know that was a lot of information on supplements. Do you have questions on that, Emily? Did that kind of help at all?
Yeah, that was really helpful. I mean, I think just in this whole food journey, especially with my 3-year-old, it's really having to be patient with things. So I'm like, if we can't get a lot of fruits and vegetables in the next year, I just want to make sure that, that he's not lacking in some really important things, even though we try to offer nutritional things, but I'm sure there are still things that are lacking. So that was a really helpful rundown of some things. And I can always email you for more.
Sure, absolutely. And I was going to say too, with him being 3, as he gets to 4, he might be more into gummies, which then like, I know my girls never let me forget to give them their gummies because, they're still working their way out of picky eating. And so I don't mind if they miss a day, but they, it's like the closest thing to candy they normally get. So they're like, we are having these gummies. And so he might get more into it by age 4.
Yeah.
So that might be a consideration. Also just something kind of food for thought when you think of what foods do they eat and how can I help meet their nutritional needs through those foods. Even something as basic as like choosing a fortified cereal instead of a normal cereal. If you look at the nutrition facts panel, if your child likes cereal because it's a beige food, you could choose, or you could choose like Cheerios that have been fortified with tons of different vitamins. Again, it's not, no supplemented vitamin or mineral is going to be absorbed in its pure, 100%. But you can see that at least those small little changes to get in some of the vitamins, the minerals, the iron, the calcium, the vitamin D, things like that, you can often get from fortified products. Same with like bread. If you can buy a bread that has higher iron content, you can sometimes get it that way. If you compare the amount of calcium that's in the yogurt you buy, these little kid yogurts are not going to have very good calcium intake. But if you compare it to a different yogurt, you might be able to get a little bit more calcium and vitamin D in that way. So just some comparisons like that, if you buy vitamin D fortified milk or orange juice or different things like that, you can start getting some of those foods in without necessarily having to buy an additional supplement. And also, I know for some families, it's a big cost prohibitive factor. It's like, I don't want to spend $30 a month on supplements, which is of course why we always want to emphasize foods first. But that's an easy way of, if you're already buying orange juice, you just buy one that's the same price, but it has a little bit of extra fortified vitamins and minerals. So that might be a consideration too, as you kind of work through this process, but as a prerequisite to deciding like, okay, do we need to go ahead and start a supplement? Okay, so I'm going to pull up the post again. Okay, I know Ruth wanted to talk about spouses, so I want to address that, but I'm glad to see Cecilia's on the call too, because I know that she has had some challenge. I'm trying to look up the post where Cecilia posted.
I have another question too at some point.
Okay, you can go ahead and chime in right now.
Okay. Sorry, cough drop. I don't. First, I'm wondering if anyone else has this issue, and if not, I'm gonna feel bummed about it. But my 2.5-year-old often, it's like almost like she associates a place with a food. So like if we go somewhere, she might eat something, but if I try to serve it at home, she won't eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And like a really small example is with our nanny. When she goes out for lunch with our nanny will buy a torta, like a Spanish sandwich, and it has like this flattened piece of chicken, and my daughter eats it happily with her. And then, but like, I know this is like super snotty of me, but I would prefer her to eat a grass-fed meat. And so like, I'm not like super, it's not my favorite thing that she's eating. I want her to eat meat. I'm not going to complain about it, and I will happily have her do it. But like, I would love to be able to do something similar at home, but she wouldn't eat that with me, because it's almost like she associates it with the nanny or like going out to that certain restaurant.
Sure.
So, and she's done that too with like lentil soup. Like we'll eat it when we go skiing, and I've tried to serve it at home and she like rejects it. So I don't know if there's like a trick or if that's just like a stage that she'll outgrow, and it's not a huge issue, but it's just like this odd thing that, I don't know. I'm wondering if you have any advice at some point on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And I think, it kind of flows into the topic from this week on talking about like how to get our kids to learn to like these learning at foods, because I mean, food is much more than just, nutritional and physiological. Like there is a lot of emotion tied to it. So I do think that, it's important the way you point out with, there's the component of association that she knows that, this is kind of a fond thing that she does with this nanny at this place that just kind of creates this experience that gets her to eat this. And I think this might, also kind of allow us to talk about Cecilia's question about just kind of like how things, like I know a lot of parents struggle with like, my kid eats fine at daycare or at preschool, and then they come home and they don't eat for me. And so why is it that like the exact same thing that they serve at preschool, I try and make it at home and then it doesn't go over well? And so part of it is just the stage. And I think it's important to, hi Ruth. I think it's important to stay consistent with that, like to still maintain the division of responsibility. With that, if it can be something that you enjoy, so if they don't eat it, you're not feeling the pressure. Because I think the hard thing is when we see a success somewhere else, we naturally come home and think, okay, they ate that, now we're going to do it at home. And then we go into the meal with like very high expectations of they already like this. And so we might be offering it as the love it or like it food in that case. And so I would say, as much as you can, try and communicate with them what the similarities are of like, hey, this is just like the recipe we had when we were skiing. This is a lentil soup, things like that. Get them engaged with it before it's on the table to be like, what did you like about that soup? Just try and kind of like harmonize how they're similar as much as you can. Obviously, it's probably not the exact same recipe, or this torta, is obviously going to be made a little bit differently. But, ask them, like, what did you like best about it? Like, oh, do you think we could try and do that? And try and kind of understand, because it may be, I just like that I eat it with my nanny and I'll eat whatever she gives me because it's just what I like to do. Or it might be, well, they do theirs this way. And obviously she's 2.5 right now. So it's kind of hard, for her to really communicate like higher level thinking about it. But I think to open up that conversation will help, one, you understand her, two, for her to understand that like these are similar foods served different places. And then I would just say, again, like with all of this, that's the hard thing with this 6-week series is like, I wish, like, I want to do this every week because I know that like, as much as I want you guys to have success in this 6-week period, I've been doing this with my daughter for going on like 3.5, 4 years. And like, I'm starting to see huge wins with her, but the wins sometimes are months apart, and so it's not like everything's going to click overnight. So that's why I think if you can just stay consistent with the approach, they'll continue to adapt and grow and thrive within it. So if you can keep making some of these things, I think it's great because one, you're seeing her accept new foods. And I think that's where we need to see like, this is great that when we go out, she is willing to surprise me. So we should start to see that like, they're willing to add like Love It foods, even if it doesn't automatically translate to a Love It food you can do at home, that they're eating in other environments. It's a huge, more high level like overview of seeing like the success that they're able to, have in a social sense. So I would say just try and kind of like, if you find a recipe, kind of try and engage her. And again, I know at 2.5, it's a little young. You can't necessarily like engage her and be like, here, let's have you chop the onions for the lentils. Like, it's still a little bit limited, but I would say still just offer it. But I would say probably put it in like the like it category. If you haven't made it at home and seen it as success, I wouldn't not like automatically assume it's a Love It food. Does that help at all? Okay. So Cecilia, I don't know if you're able to unmute, but I'm glad to see you on here and I would love to chat with you about some of the frustrations that you're having. And I know it's been a little bit discouraging so far. Can you share with me a little bit of kind of what's going on and what we might be able to chat through to help with today?
Yeah. So, so my son is going to be 2 in a couple of weeks. So he's still, 23 and a half months or years. But honestly, like I'm trying to stick to Love It, Like It, Learn It. And literally my list of Love It's have gone to 0 because there's like nothing he loves at home anymore, even though he loves stuff at school. His Like It, like he just doesn't eat anything. Like I know he eats well enough at school. So I just don't, I let him go to sleep with his glass of milk or his cup of milk. And that's all he eats basically every night. And on the weekends, I'm lucky if he has, a couple of bites of his egg in the morning and a couple of like, it's just random. Like sometimes he'll eat the Like It foods and he won't touch the Love It foods. He has never once touched a Learn It food, touched it, smelt it. Doesn't even acknowledge it.
And how does he react? Sorry to interject, but tell me how a mealtime would go down at home from like even before you offer it, and like, does he get upset? Does he participate in any of the meal prep, or kind of like walk me through that process of what it would look like from deciding?
So I guess it depends. Like in the mornings is usually when I have more time and more patience, and I'm like, okay, let's do the scrambled eggs. So he'll get sit there and like pass me the eggs. He'll do the orange juice. He'll help me cut up some strawberries. And then when it's time to sit, he's like, no. Like he just doesn't even want to sit down for dinner, for lunch, for breakfast. But then my husband and I, we all sit down, and then he finally comes around and sits down and he just kind of looks at the food, pushes it here and there, but doesn't eat it. And I don't know if it's just because he knows that he's going to get his cup of milk before he goes to bed for nap. But I mean, he's definitely not eating a lot of calories during the day, but the doctor's like, look, I wouldn't be, just don't offer him anything else. Just offer him one meal and that's what he's going to get. I've also taken away
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've taken away all snacks on the weekends. So he gets 3 meals a day, and his 2 cups of milk, 3 cups of milk, one in the morning, middle, nap time and bedtime.
Okay.
But I mean, it's just not consistent even with his Love It's or Like It's. And he's never once touched the Learn It.
And how is kind of his temperament, and how is your and your husband's? And I ask that with no judgment, knowing that like we all are frustrated, especially when our kids seem to be self-starving themselves. So like how, how much, I guess, is it weighing on you and your husband at the mealtime? And then how does he respond? Does your son seem pretty upset about it, or he's just kind of like, I'm fine, I don't need to eat?
No, I mean, my husband and I are like, okay, well, this is what we're going to offer. I'm not going to give him anything else. So, we'll walk it through like, oh, but daddy's eating this, do you like this? Do you want to try this something? I kind of explain everything what he has. And he just goes, nope, nope, nope. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, do you want to give some to Papa? And he'll give food from his plate to his dad, but he won't try it. I have tried the whole family style where, he can serve himself, and he loves to serve himself and serve other people. He just doesn't put anything in his mouth.
And I know at his age, he's a little bit in between like the 18 and 24 months checkup, but his growth always seemed on trend.
Yeah, he's always been, been on the heavier side. He's about 30 pounds right now, which is he hasn't done his 2-year checkup, but the last time he went for the 18-month was when the doctor's like, look, he's doing well on the charts. Like, he's like, don't offer him anything else than what you're giving him. He's just testing you guys.
Yeah. And I would say, this age, we all know with everyone who's ever had a child that age, they are testing us. And I know it's hard because it's like, is this making any success? But I can also say that like the only way you will see success is just to kind of ride this out longer than he does this stage. Yeah. So as hard as that is, I think it is really a muscle. And if you can just keep training that muscle for you and your husband in the thick of it when it's so hard, then if you start to see him responding to it, you're going to be so strong at just being able to do it that it's not going to wear as much. And he's also going to see that he's not, I hate to say winning, but like he's not making the advances that he might want. I mean, it doesn't sound like, if it was true appetite, I think you would hear a lot of other complaints, because I think it sounds like, you're being very consistent. You're minimizing like the excess snacking that could be displacing appetite. After 2 years, I would say probably try and scale back to like no more than 16 ounces of milk a day, just to make a little bit of room. I mean, normally between 1 year and 2 years, I normally try and encourage kids to go from like 24 ounces of milk to 16. And then that leaves room for like one more dairy serving, whether it be yogurt or cheese or something like that. But, maybe try and wean one of those and see, like, is that milk just displacing that little bit? Because regardless of a child's size, appetite can be very small. So even if he's, a healthy boy and, plots well on the growth chart and stuff, he may just not have a huge appetite. So even 1 cup of milk a day, can just displace it that much more, especially if you said he does eat pretty well at daycare, right?
Yeah. And so I went, because I'm on maternity leave right now, I even went to go spy on him twice last week. And he's definitely like when they give him fried rice, he picks around the vegetables, but he eats the rice. Okay. And he eats, the chicken. And at school, sometimes when they're like, when they're trying to give them different servings, like the teachers even sometimes give them like spoon feed them if they're like seeing that they're struggling, and he'll eat whatever the teacher puts in his mouth. So I know that it's just, he's just testing me, and I would say
part of that is that one, yes, I think, we often see kids respond differently to whether it be the nanny that Julia was talking about or at daycare. Kids do eat better often for the people who aren't their parents. But also, it's very common, we've talked about this before on the calls, that dinner is the worst meal of the day for kids, kind of across the board. So if you know that he's eating well during the day, and then you know that he's growing well, as irritating in the process it can be, at least it does give you some peace of mind that he's eating enough for his growth, even if it's like he's starving himself because he skips all these meals. And even if on weekends, it's very common for kids to not eat consistent amounts every day, but I always say like my oldest is like a snake, where she'll like eat a ton at one meal and then just kind of like seem like she could just wither away for a few days, and then she'll find, a meal that she loves. She'll eat like a ton of that, like a huge amount, and then kind of keep going. So kids can have kind of erratic quantities in terms of how much they eat. But I would say, especially as you go to this 2-year checkup, just make sure that he continues to be trending well. And that can kind of be your reminder that like he knows intrinsically how much to eat, and he knows how to regulate it. He's not regulating it in a way that like makes it easy on you or gives you much peace of mind, but he is regulating it for his body type and what he needs. So with that, I would say just continue to offer meals as you do. Offer, even if it's not Levitt Foods, maybe, as he starts to get a little older and you can start to understand what he's saying a little bit more, try and communicate to him, or ask him, can you, is there a food that you'd like to have at this meal? Or when you're at the store, say, is there something you would like to eat this week? Or try and kind of engage him. So even though it might not start out as a love it food, just get him to buy in on the food a little bit. So in the produce section, say, can you pick a fruit you'd like to eat this week? He may still not enjoy it or something, but it at least gets him engaged. So, there's some pull or some potential preference for that food. And then, I would say like, just kind of stick to that. Like if he picks a banana or a cantaloupe or an apple, like let him help wash it. Like maybe, after 2, he can really start using like kid safe knives. Let him start kind of like helping cut it. And just, if it's only 1 food a week, kind of focus on that food, or, fruit and vegetables is easier because you're not going to like have your child help you cut raw meat. But, those are more colorful, fun, engaging foods at that age where he might be able to kind of get into it. And you at least see that like he's interested as much as you would hope he would be before he would possibly eat it. So I would say like, as you kind of bridge into 2, try to start do that, and maybe once every weekend, have that food kind of be the one that like you're featuring and that like you're mentally kind of focusing on. And again, don't go into it with the assumption that he's going to eat it, or else you might get frustrated. But if you can just like help him engage with it before the table and go through that link that's on the featured article from this week's email of, trying to get him through the steps of eating it. So get him to interact with it, get him to touch it and, be tolerant to it and smell it and feel it and all these things that before you serve it on the table, and just see, does that help him kind of move through a process with a food that he might be willing to eat. But I think, it sounds like most of the things that typically would be like a not a red flag, but a little bit like of an alert to me of like, that's probably the problem. I don't think he's having an excessive amount of milk, but I do think, closer to 2, you can back that down on that. But otherwise, I think he's probably just getting, what his body needs at preschool, and it just kind of carries him through, which, makes it a little harder when he's at home with you. But at the same time, I think because you're not compensating right now, you're not doing a lot of the behaviors that to me would be like, that's probably perpetuating the problem. You're staying consistent with the mealtime structure. You're not offering a lot of like filler foods. The kitchen is clearly closed between meals. You're not asking him to eat. You're doing a lot of the right things. I would say like, if you can just weather the storm and stick it out a little bit further, I think you'll start to see him coming out of it. Because a lot of times what happens is like, if you ever look at like the growth chart, of infancy and then toddlerhood, like their appetite is so high in infancy, but as they get toddlers, like their growth rate slows down. And it was probably backwards on the video, but their growth rate slows down a lot. And oftentimes we forget that eagerness and that appetite that they had as infants is going to slow down too, as they're not growing. So I think he's probably just in that place where he's just doesn't have as big of an appetite, and he doesn't need to sustain the growth, like the rate of growth that he's going through. So he's just, eating less because of that.
Okay, so one question. So do I keep his love it and likes it from what I remember? Like, what if he doesn't like touch his love it food? Does that automatically make it a like it food, or do I just keep it as a love it food?
So, I would say if it's just once that a child kind of is like, I don't want it, I wouldn't necessarily change it. I think you're in a unique situation because there are maybe potentially no love it foods at this point.
Yeah.
But I think it sounds like with that, it's more appetite than behavioral. So I don't know if that's easier or harder for you, because, sometimes I think if it's behavioral, it's easier to condition a child into more love it foods. But in his case, I would just say like, try and get him to kind of be interested. And I would kind of probably assume foods are like it or learning it until you see him like actively having an appetite for those foods again.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then I would just say too, like, as you do the division of responsibility and you come up with a meal, I would say don't stress too much about if there's something at the table that he wants. I would say have something familiar, but I think for you, it might help to think through it more in terms of, is this familiar or is this unfamiliar, rather than like, because that's really what it boils down to, is pairing familiar and unfamiliar foods rather than like love it, because I think that assumes that they're going to eat it or that they're going to enjoy it. So mentally that might kind of help you in the meal planning.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That helps a lot.
Yeah, no problem. And just reach out to me if you have other questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wraps up. Okay. So I want to jump in really quick. We only have about 2 minutes, so let's cut this off. But I wanted to jump in and address, let's see, Ruth's question about spouses. I know we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I did share an article about parenting feeding styles. And I would say, like, just very short, since we don't have a ton of time. If you're struggling with like having your spouse get on board with this, kind of a few different things. I guess this isn't really like the quickest conversation, but you know, if they're open to reading, I know my husband doesn't even read my blog post, so he's not going to read this article. So if your husband's open to reading, share it with them, and then just kind of create the dialogue about what they think about it. You know, some spouses are more receptive to, this is evidence-based, this is what the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, basically every overarching organization would recommend. Some parents, you know, especially some like more engineer-minded husbands, might be more prone to take that as like, okay, this is factual, not just this like random thing you're hearing from this hokey lady on the internet. You know, that sometimes might validate it a little bit more. For other people, it might really be talking about like what matters to you in the mealtime environment. And for some, I can't remember who was on, I think it was Carrie, was talking about like, you know, the Italian family meal that her family did, and how, you know, there's an expectation to eat at that family meal. And so if you can talk with your spouse about like what their barriers with it are, like if your spouse really has an issue with your child going to bed hungry, talk about like, okay, well, would you be willing to us doing this, but let's do a bedtime snack, so we know that they're not going to bed hungry and you're not going to have to be the one to get up with them. So if you can kind of chat through like what hesitations your spouse has. And then also, like, my husband's big on cleaning his plate. Like, I have to communicate to him, like, is that what you want, though? Because I think sometimes our spouses can see maybe where their own relationship with food. As women, I think we tend to think about it and be a little bit more in tune with that. But I think husbands often don't necessarily pay as much attention to, like, well, I've always cleaned my plate, that's just what you do. And yet they really have no idea of their hunger and fullness mechanism. So for us to be able to kind of talk through it with our spouses about, like, well, how can we maybe equip our children to be better self-regulators? You know, like, what do we want for them now, but also what do we want for them as adults? So I think if you can just kind of use whatever the opposition or the argument is against it, just kind of really invite that conversation, and then use those blog posts to kind of not necessarily support your argument, but to kind of talk through, like, okay, well, this is what the research says, if they're research minded, or, you know, okay, if this is important to you, how could we maybe work the division of responsibility within this? So I don't know if that helps for anyone, but that would be kind of in short. If you guys want to have a group discussion on the Facebook page about this, I'd be happy to, you know, kind of keep the dialogue going, since we're out of time now. But I know since Ruth hopped on and then had to get off, it looks like I would say kind of start there, and then, you know, see if you can kind of make some dialogue progress, and just in terms of like seeing why they're so against it, and then seeing, and maybe, you know, this week, pose it in the group, like, okay, I talked to my spouse about it. This is why they don't think this is a good idea, or why they can't get on board with it. How do we address? And we can kind of dialogue about it a little bit more there. Does that help? Okay. Sorry that we are out of time, a little bit over time, and so I'm gonna have to hop off of here, but we can definitely keep the dialogue going. I am gonna have a group chat next week just to kind of get some feedback from all of you guys, so we won't necessarily talk about content, but I would just love to hear from anyone who's willing to hop on and chat with me to kind of say, like, this is what was helpful, this is what was not, this is what could be better, because I truly love constructive feedback, and it's very helpful for me to know how to help families. So I'll send out an email about that as well. But if you guys can join me for that next week, that would be great. But otherwise, that'll be kind of like the last wrap-up email. But you guys are lifetime members to the Facebook group, so if you ever have questions or want to share pictures, or, you know, want to kind of chat through things that are going on, feel free to post them in the group, because I'm sure that they can benefit other people. But also feel free to always email me if you have a direct question or need to set up a one-on-one or something like that. I know some people have had to drop off already since we're a little bit over time, but Emily or Cecilia, do you guys have any questions before we hop off?
No, just thanks so much. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Ashley. I'm good.
Okay, great. Well, feel free to reach out, especially Cecilia, as you kind of start to work through things, as he kind of makes the hump over too and stuff, if you guys have questions. But thank you guys so much for letting me hopefully try and help, and hopefully you feel like you're on a little bit better trajectory now moving forward.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you.
Ashley.
Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.